Hello, everybody. I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So this is a relative rarity in Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar series, and this rarity is a standalone book. She's got two that I can think of offhand. Well, two that are proper novels. There are a couple of collections written by assorted authors who are not Mercedes Lackey. There are some Valdemar reference companions, one of which included a novella that I know of offhand. But of the standalone books, well, I said two before, there are three, as far as I'm aware off the top of my head. And they are, as I said, standalone. They're not part of a trilogy, and that's odd. Because the majority of this series runs in trilogies, Collegium Chronicles, and I believe Harold Alberich's story notwithstanding, most of this is trilogies. So Brightly Burning is fill-in backstory. In a book we haven't gotten to yet, which is the first book in the series, Arrows of the Queen. The thing about Arrows of the Queen, um, which is the first book that Mercedes Lackey, I believe the first book she ever published, and it was the first book ever written in this series, and it will not come for a while yet because we are, as I said at the start of this, going through these chronologically. In that book, the character Talia, who is our protagonist, mentions at various points Harold Van Yell, who we've already seen his story in the last Harold Mage trilogy. And Lavin Firestorm comes up. And the thing about those two is we both know those stories end in tragedy because they say so in Arrows. And so what we have here is a book that, if you have been reading the series in the order that they were published, going into this story, all spoiler zone, remember, it's not going to go well. Which was why I kind of rolled my eyes at a friend of mine who was unhappy with how sadly the story ended, as though she shouldn't have known that it was coming because she had read Arrows first just as I had. So that makes this an interesting little book in its way, because this is almost not filling in backstory. This is almost answering just the question of what was it that they had in their history books. I mean, because this is Lavin's story, and it's told primarily from the perspective of Lavin Firestorm and his mentor, Pol, it's obviously not what's actually in the history books, but it is nonetheless, a just kind of filling in an obvious gap. And I mean, there are a lot of gaps that Mercedes Lackey can fill in, assuming she, winds up doing that. But in this case, this is just in case anyone was wondering what the horrific, sad story of Harold Lavin Firestorm is. So this book starts with Lavin, who is just the son of a couple of guild masters, one of whom is a cloth guild master and the other of whom is I'm not even sure what his mother is. She's some sort of a sewing, clothing making guild that I don't recall offhand, and I'm not going to look it up because honestly it's not really all that important. And he is not the youngest child, but he's one of those lost children who doesn't fit into the family, doesn't want to be in the family business, and also doesn't really have a direction, although honestly, in Lavin's case, the lack of direction is at least partly due to the fact that his parents don't want to let him take the direction he is so inclined to take. And that is, he wants to join the Guard, and he wants to be an officer, but as with the Army in the real world, being an officer, joining up with the Army and becoming an officer in the Army requires the money to pay for, going to academies and paying for equipment and things like that. In his case, he would have had to arrive there with a horse and with various other things like that. And so he's not foolish enough to say that he's so desperate to get away that he's going to join just the regular troops, because he knows that that's not really what he wants. But his parents' lack of support means that he can't actually do the thing that he wants. So he's ultimately directionless. And his parents wind up signing him up for a merchant school. That is, in the past books, we've had it come up that you have the three collegia, the Herald's Collegium, the Bardic Collegium, and the Healer's Collegium. But I haven't mentioned a intermittently important but collegium that is kind of an unofficial fourth one up at the palace, and that is the so-called Blues Collegium. And what that really is it's like a general university for engineering and things of that nature. The theoretical idea behind the Blues Collegium is that it's something for parents with shiftless children to send their children to. It's something that that particularly talented, gifted youngsters can get invited to join in there. Well, the merchants decided to they decided to take a page from that and created a sort of a merchanting college, you could call it. And basically, the children of merchants, you would pay a certain amount of money, a tuition fee, and they would teach you things like foreign languages, conversion rates, trade routes, the sort of things that somebody who is running a business in a pseudo-medieval sort of place might want or need to know. Because there are a lot of things of that nature that you can learn from a teacher rather than from the doing. That's why we have colleges. And it's why in the Collegium Chronicles, the Herald's Collegium had shifted over to having classes and only a year of internship, because it means that you can have a professional at teaching reading teach some poor unfortunate illiterate to read. Anyway, so unfortunately this school is run by a headmaster principal who doesn't really care and who has allowed the oldest students to act. Now, they could be prefects, but they're not prefects. He basically says the oldest students, here, take over discipline because I and the rest of the teachers here can't be bothered. And so, being stupid teenagers, they, of course, become horrific bullies because that's what they do. That's what happens when you let the prisoners run the prison, or in this case, let the eldest students run all the discipline. So they bully Lavin, who is nicknamed Lan for short. They bully him so horrifically that his gift, which is the fire-starting gift, pyrokinesis, blazes out of control, which, since he didn't even know he had it, is double the shock, and several of the bullies die. Lavin gets severely burned. Anyways, and following the crisis, the companion Kalira chooses him. And it turns out they are life bonded, which is like being soulmates, which is weird because she's a horse. Yes, 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 she's a companion. They're not really horses, they're horses. Um, I mean, yes, they're horses in the way that a zebra is a horse, but to a certain extent, I'm willing to throw all equines under the same banner for the sake of she's got 4 legs and a mane. Um, anyway, so we follow the course of this book as he makes friends, goes to his classes, and war breaks out, and he gets sent to the front lines, and he dies. And he dies in causing a horrific conflagration right on the border, because they shoot his companion, who, as I said earlier, is life bonded to him. So it's kind of like he loses, because the companion bond is in itself a strong telepathic emotional bond, and then the life bond is also a different kind of bond. So it's kind of like he lost his, you know, best friend and his wife and helpmeet and goodness knows what else all at the same time, and he kind of goes insane and decides to just burn everybody who was trying to hurt them. And at the end of it, he's burned himself up as well. So, it's a tragedy. It's a very pleasant book right up until, enjoyable to read. There's a bit of drama and angst and all that other stuff right up until the end when Kalira dies and he just goes nuts. Of interest to note is this book has illustrations. Each of the chapter headings, and I apologize for the quality of this, they obviously look better when they're not in super close zoom in, but this is what I can do. Each of the chapter headings is a picture of either a character, like King Theron, who uses Levin for various political and propagandist reasons. We're going to war and the gods have given us Levin Firestorm to, help us win. And everyone roars in approval, which makes Levin, not surprisingly, particularly upset because that's a lot of pressure to place on a teenager. And Tuck and Eleanor, Tuck being a fellow herald in training, Eleanor being Lavin's mentor's daughter, so Harold Pole's daughter, and Owen is just one of the other kids at the merchant school who Lavin had become friends with. We don't really see him again after the whole merchant school thing is over, which is a bit of a pity, but I mean, he kind of falls out of the story at that point. And this, which is Harold Pole and his wife, Alea. And so we get these illustrations. Other chapter titles are just drawn fire. Like, obviously drawn in this, slightly, in this deliberately charcoal sketchy style, but it's just chapter titles of a box of fire. The last chapter title is Eyes in a Fire, which one suspects is Lavin looking out from the fire. So these illustrations are, as you may have seen, they are fairly typical for Mercedes Lackey's books. A lot of her books have illustrations, normally by her husband, Larry Dixon. I was just double checking, and yes, interior art by Larry Dixon, and the cover art is, of course, as always, done by, or almost always done by Jody Lee. Anyway, so I'm throwing this in with the last trilogy because this book really doesn't have a place, And that's about everything that I'm going to say about this book, so I will see you all next week.